I think if I was to pick a title for this, if this was a talk and I picked a title, it would be the word forward. You know? It's about how do we move forward as an industry. It's about how do we look forward, how do we think in a forward fashion, rather than retrospective profiling of things and benchmarking and report cards of things. How do we become predictive in our thinking? How do we become predictive in our mindset? You know, how do we get ahead of the next wave? How do we, so it's about forward. And, you know, brand tracking isn't the only thing that's backward looking, you know, where you wait a few months to accumulate enough surveys and then kind of see how you did the last quarter, and usually not that much changed in survey results, although in real life a lot might have changed. The other thing that's very backward looking is marketing mix modeling. Now, how many of you guys are ever involved with marketing mix modeling? Okay, some of you. Okay, so let me just explain. What marketing mix modeling is basically a marketer will take their data on sales, and they'll take their data on advertising, broken out by TV and print and radio and promotions, and they might put digital in there, although some don't do a very good job of putting in digital, you know, and they put that into a regression model where the idea is that you're trying to determine what's working. So what's driving sales up? So if you see a spike in sales in a particular period that corresponds to when you were running a lot of TV advertising, statistically you'll infer that, you know, TV advertising has a certain effect on the business. So what's the problem with that? Well, the problem with that is I never heard of WhatsApp until Facebook bought it for, what is it, $15 billion or something like that? 19. Okay, so, you know, and I never would have thought that Google would have bought Nest for, what was that, $3 billion? You know, you think about it, it makes so much sense, though, in the world of what's becoming the Internet of Things. So these things are happening almost weekly. You have these developments that are reflecting changes in how people are or will be living their lives. And marketers need to get ahead of that. Well, what happens in marketing mix modeling is you have to collect 2 or 3 years of historical data because it's a regression model. So what was the world like 3 years ago, let's say? Okay? I can only build a model off of what I had. How much was I spending on mobile? Well, it's certainly not enough to put that in the model. You know, how much was I spending on behavioral targeting via social media? Probably not that much. How much was I spending on taking my own consumer segments from my first party data, finding these people based on cookies in real-time bidding exchanges, and buying advertising when they show up on the Facebook exchange or Twitter via tailored audiences? Zero, because those services didn't exist 3 years ago. So what happens is when I use an approach that requires 3 years of historical data, I am already at least 3 years behind the times in terms of my understanding of what's actually working. So what happens under those circumstances is marketers revert back to something they're usually fairly comfortable with, which is leaps of faith. You know? So what do I think? What am I reading in, you know, the trade press and what's working? And, you know, if you go back to what people were saying in 2007 or so, it was, you know, TV is dead, right? No one wants to be interrupted. So if I took the extension of this, and these were like leading thinkers in the industry, leading consultants saying this nonsense. Why is it nonsense? Because when you look at TV viewing data, it's actually rock solid. Now, the way we view has changed somewhat, but people are still watching 5 hours of long-form video content, basically, every day. Much more than any, it's still the 800-pound gorilla, or at least 720 pounds. It's still the big thing. So if it's a failure of research to create data models that reflect on these hypothesized mental models that marketing has, to show evidence as to what parts of them are right and what parts of them are not right. Because you need to steer the organization in the correct path. So, and that was another one of my blogs. It was kind of like a myth-buster blog that got a lot of sharing. And you know, it's a compelling thing when you can prove to an organization that a certain thing that they're reading about is that they shouldn't be reacting to it in that way. There was one client I worked with where they felt that social media was clearly the changing force. And when we actually quantified for them how much advertising pressure or communication was coming via paid media versus earned media versus owned media, it turned out owned media was actually much more important to them than they ever realized. And it was more important to them than social media. So it was like basically nobody was measuring this stuff. And because they weren't measuring it, they were engaging in wrong behaviors. And so by measuring this, by creating a structure and a rigorous way of bringing data together that provides insight against these mental models, against any of these measures to which you would not be agnostic, by bringing data together, that's the only way that you're actually going to steer the ocean liner in the correct direction.